5 days after I gave birth, I came home to find my house sold, my husband gone, and everything I owned taken away with his mistress. The front door stood open like a wound, and my daughter's tiny cries echoed from my arms as I stared at the empty rooms where my life had been erased. His note was brief. No apology, no explanation, only a signature that felt colder than the winter air outside. I did not scream or collapse. I simply looked at the missing photographs, the stripped shelves, and the betrayal I would never forget. I sold my wedding ring for a ticket home and, at the station, spent my last dollar helping an elderly stranger who had nowhere to go. 2 weeks later, as I sat quietly at my parents' house, a limousine stopped outside. The driver stepped out, looked at me, and called my name. My name is Elena, and for 8 years I believed I was building a family with a man who only saw me as part of the background. I met Daniel when we were young, before success changed him and before I learned how easily some people confuse kindness with weakness. I was the person who remembered birthdays, paid attention to small details, and stood beside him when nobody else believed in him. When he started his company, I was there late at night, keeping our home together while he chased opportunities that slowly pulled him away from us. He called me supportive, but over time that word became another way of saying invisible. After our daughter was born, I thought the quiet moments would bring us closer. Instead, I noticed the distance in his eyes, the unanswered messages, and the excuses that arrived more often than he did. I ignored the warning signs because I wanted to believe in the man I married, not the stranger he was becoming. People like Daniel often underestimate those who stay silent. They mistake patience for surrender and gentleness for helplessness. What he never understood was that I had spent years watching, learning, and remembering. I knew every habit, every weakness, and every lie he thought he had hidden. I simply never had a reason to reveal what I knew, until he took everything from me. The first signs of betrayal did not arrive with a confession. They came quietly, hidden inside ordinary moments that most people would have ignored. Daniel began leaving his phone face down on the table. When I walked into the room, conversations would pause, and his eyes would shift away before I could ask why. He started correcting the way I spoke, the way I dressed, even the way I laughed, as if every small part of me had become something he needed to fix. At dinner, he would glance at the clock while I talked about my day. His silence was not peaceful anymore. It was a message. Sometimes I caught him smiling at a screen in the dark, but when I asked about it, his expression turned cold. "You worry too much," he would say, with a tired sigh that made me feel like a burden instead of a wife. The people around us noticed the change before I admitted it to myself. Friends would ask if everything was okay, and I would answer with the same practiced smile. I remember standing in our kitchen one evening, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold, watching him walk past me without a word. That was the moment I understood something had shifted. He was not leaving me suddenly. He had been leaving me slowly, piece by piece, while making sure I noticed nothing. The moment everything changed was not when I found out about the other woman. It was when I realized Daniel had already decided I was someone he could erase. I was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, my newborn daughter sleeping against my chest, when he looked at me and spoke with a calmness that hurt more than anger ever could. "We need to make changes," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Things are different now." I remember studying his face, searching for the man who once promised to protect me. I found nothing familiar there, only someone who had convinced himself that my silence meant I had no power. That night, while my daughter slept, I stopped asking why he did this. I stopped searching for the version of him I wanted to save. I began saving everything else: documents, messages, financial records, every detail I had ignored because I trusted him. I did not confront him. I did not beg. I simply watched and prepared. But I was too late to stop the betrayal he had already planned. When I returned home 5 days after giving birth and found my life gone, I finally understood the truth. Daniel had not destroyed me. He had removed the only thing standing between me and my own strength, the illusion that I needed him. I did not spend those first days planning revenge. I spent them rebuilding control. My parents expected tears, anger, a desperate call to Daniel. Instead, they found me sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook, a cup of untouched coffee, and every detail of my old life organized in front of me. Years of managing Daniel's business records, reviewing contracts, and handling the responsibilities he ignored had taught me something important. Emotions disappear, but evidence remains. I contacted a lawyer and quietly began tracing every decision Daniel had made while I was away. The house sale, the transfers, the accounts he believed I would never question. Nothing was done with accusations or threats. Every step was measured. The lawyer told me patience would matter more than anger. I understood that. Daniel expected a broken woman who would chase him for answers. He did not expect someone who could wait. So I waited. I gathered documents, recorded timelines, and rebuilt connections with people Daniel had dismissed because he thought they only mattered when he needed them. The greatest mistake he made was believing I had nothing left. He saw an abandoned wife. I saw a person with knowledge, proof, and the patience to let the truth arrive at the perfect moment. My revenge would not be loud. It would be undeniable. The limousine arrived on a gray morning, the kind of morning when the world feels suspended between endings and beginnings. I watched from my parents' window as the driver stepped onto the pavement. He was not there to deliver a warning or a demand. He was there because someone finally wanted to hear my side of the story. When I opened the door, he handed me a folder with my name written across the front. Inside were documents that changed everything. The elderly man I had helped at the station was not just a stranger passing through my life. He was a retired investor whose company Daniel had been trying to impress for months. He had remembered my kindness when I had nothing left to give. While Daniel was celebrating the life he thought he had stolen from me, the truth was quietly moving in another direction. The evidence I collected, combined with what the investor uncovered about Daniel's dishonest dealings, brought everything into the light. The house was returned. The accounts were frozen. The reputation Daniel protected so carefully began to disappear. I never stood in front of him and shouted. I never needed to. The most painful consequence for Daniel was watching me rebuild without him. The woman he abandoned was gone. In her place stood someone he could no longer control. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. There were no dramatic confrontations, no public speeches, no moment where Daniel suddenly understood everything he had done. Life rarely gives people such perfect endings. Instead, the consequences arrived slowly, through closed doors and unanswered calls. The people who once admired Daniel began looking at him differently. Friends who had accepted his charm started noticing the pattern beneath it. The confidence he carried so easily became a mask that no longer convinced anyone. His mistress, who had believed she was stepping into a better life, discovered that a stolen future is never as beautiful as it appears from the outside. The promises Daniel made to her were the same kind of promises he had once made to me. But the biggest change was not in them. It was in me. For years, I measured my worth by how much I could give others. I thought being needed meant being loved. Losing everything forced me to learn the difference. People often believe revenge is about making someone else suffer. They miss the deeper truth. Sometimes revenge is simply refusing to let someone's cruelty define who you become. Daniel took my home, my security, and my trust. But he never took the one thing he should have feared, losing my ability to begin again. Months later, I stood in the doorway of a home that was finally mine. Not because someone gave it back to me, but because I had built a life that no one could take away again. My daughter played on the floor beside me, laughing at something only she understood, and I realized that the happiest moments of my life had arrived after everything I thought I needed was gone. I no longer carried anger toward Daniel. Anger would have kept me connected to him, and I had spent enough years letting him occupy space in my heart. What happened changed me, but it did not harden me. I still believed in kindness. I still helped strangers. I still trusted people, but now I trusted myself first. The elderly man at the station had reminded me of something I had forgotten. Even in my darkest moment, I was still capable of giving. That was the part of me Daniel never understood and never could destroy. I started a new career, surrounded myself with people who valued me, and raised my daughter to know that love should never require someone to disappear. Looking back, I do not remember the day Daniel left as the day my life ended. I remember it as the day I finally came home to myself. Because the greatest revenge was never watching him lose everything. It was realizing I had gained everything he could never take from me.